Welcome to another edition of Inside Carolina's Next Level. I'm Tommy Ashley. That's Greg Barnes. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. And Greg wanted to do a show here about the football program, about this football team, the 2024 season, a little bit different than what we'll do on a game plan live on Thursday night, where that's a little more fact-based, stat-based, I would say. But just wanted to get your opinion on what you're seeing on the field and sort of the dynamic that's happening here in Mack Brown's sixth year. I mean, it seems like there's some things going on that just simply can't happen in a program. I wanted to get your take because you followed it forever, you've been around forever, and you're much more knowledgeable than I am about it. Your overall thoughts, and we'll dig into some of this stuff.
Well, Tommy, you've watched a lot of Carolina football over the years, so I am certainly not in a position to say that I understand this a lot better than you do. I think the passionate Carolina football fans who have followed the program for a long time, the diehards, have a pretty good understanding of kind of where things stand. And what we try to do is take any emotion out of it while still being able to provide some objective commentary on kind of where things stand. But I think that the challenge is for most everybody is as you get further along into the program building process, and this goes for every team in every sport. But at some point along the road, you start having disagreements within the fan base if you're not having the success that was expected. And we can talk about levels of expectation. Obviously at a Georgia, that's going to be different than that in North Carolina, which is going to be different than at an ECU. I think everybody understands that. But whatever level of expectation you have in your program for the fan base, as you work along this path, you start to see there being kind of factions of the fan base forming. That there are groups that say, yeah, we're almost there. We just need this player, and this is a rebuilding year, but we're okay for the future. And then you have other groups saying, I like the personnel, I just don't like the coaching staff. And then you have others saying, I'll blow it up. We got to start fresh. And if you go back to the John Bunning days, towards the end, especially if you're familiar with the IC message boards, there was a group called the Bitter Bunch. And this was a group of posters were pretty much like, look, Bunning's not it. He's not the guy. The program needs to move forward. And at the time, they were called the Bitter Bunch because there were others who were like, you know what? He came into a mess. Give him some time. He's recruiting okay. We'll get to the other side of it. And we kind of know how that turned out. At some point, though, you get to a situation where and you start having a majority believe that, okay, like we're pretty much, we've tried it. It's not working. We need to start looking ahead and figuring out what the plan is moving forward. And I don't know if we're quite at that point yet, but it seems like all things are kind of converging in that regard. As we talked after the James Madison game, Tommy, yeah, at that point in time, it was imperative for Carolina to be able to say, this game is just a fluke. We did very poorly in all phases, including coaching. We're going to bounce back. And for a half, at least, at Duke, you could kind of make the case, okay, like that was an aberration. They're going to be fine. And now here we are, 3 losses later. What's going on? And I think some of the concerns that are glaring, and I wrote about it in my column this week. But one of the main talking points this offseason was how Carolina had closed so poorly in the last 3 years. And so that was something that Mack Brown was aware of. And so one of the conversation points was, there's different things that go into play, right? I mean, it is a tougher schedule at the end of the year, last couple of years. But there's also the fact that way too many guys are playing way too many snaps. And so by the end of the year, they get tired. And in July, Mack was talking about, hey, we had 2 linebackers that played like 900 snaps last year, and they were gassed by the end of the year. And then if you start playing your starters too many snaps, well, then you can't play them on special teams, and then your special teams suffer. And that's not going to happen again. We've talked about it for 5 years. It's not going to happen this year. This is what Mack said. It's happening. We're seeing it happen. And it's kind of like, okay, well, this is not supposed to happen. You said this is not going to happen, but it's happening. And Power Eccles is on pace, I think, for 850 snaps if things continue and North Carolina makes a bowl game. That's a concern. And then the fact that a lot of the guys who are playing so many snaps are in their last year at Carolina. So you're not really building depth for the future. All these things kind of are coming up and serving as significant issues. And when you project forward to the second half of the season, I don't know how those things get better. And so at this point in time, I think there's significant concern about this season. I mean, just getting to a bowl game against this type of schedule, at a minimum, should be the expectation. And North Carolina is not guaranteed to get to a bowl game this year. That's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, when you look at it, we've talked about the schedule aspect of it, and quite frankly, the numbers do not lie. This schedule is as weak as it gets. North Carolina lost to a James Madison team that did not have a program 8 months prior. They lost to a Duke team that led 20-0, and both of those programs, none of the excuses of money, admin support, talent, none of those applied for those two games, and they lost them. Pitt's a good football team. I mean, they're undefeated. They've got good players. But still, Greg, the thing that concerns me watching this objectively is that the same issues that we've talked about for 6 years now have been issues. Clock management, special teams, those type snap counts, those type things. At what point do you know? You said earlier, I'm not sure if we're at that point. I don't know if we're at that point yet. But at what point is it glaringly obvious that this is not going any differently than it has in the first 5 years? I don't know if that's a fair question to you, but I think it is a valid question that needs to be answered definitively at some point.
For sure. And I think it's a very good point, Tommy. For me, I don't even know if I know the answer to that. I think you kind of have to wait and see how the season plays out. I know a lot of people who are in favor of making a move want to go ahead and do it. I just don't see that happening with what Mack Brown has done for the program, what he means to the program, and those types of things. I think if there is a decision to be made, it's going to happen after the season. So therefore, you have a little bit more time for this to get turned around. But like we said after the JMU game, like this needs to head in a positive direction quickly. And it hasn't. It's gone the other direction. And so I think as the season plays on, if it continues on the track that it is, ESPN FPI gives North Carolina a 67% chance of reaching 6 wins. So that means there's a 33% chance, given the metrics, that Carolina has a losing record. That's pretty bad. So then you get into the situation of, wins enough, right? Which is kind of the gist of your question there. And I think it's an important question. It's fun for fans to talk about and for media to talk about, but it's really important for administration to talk about and to figure out. I mean, you can make the case, did Bubba wait too long with Larry Fedora? Because 2017 was a disaster. And there really wasn't any indication that 2018 was going to be any better. And at least early in the season in 2018, there wasn't much conversation about Fedora being gone after that year until Mack Brown became available and was willing to take the job without taking a major salary as his contract. So, and Carolina has, of course, a long history of that. We talked about Bunning. I mean, Dick Bedore pretty much fired Carl Turbush after 2 years and then reneged on the decision and said, well, we're going to give you 1 more year. And then went ahead and fired him after that year. So that's an important question. How, with the current setup of college athletics and where football ranks in those components, can you afford? Let's say Carolina goes 5-7 this year. Is this team going to be better next year? Because think about the number of guys who are playing a lot of snaps this year who won't be back, right? I mean, Willie Lampton's the best offensive lineman Carolina has by far. He'll be gone. Marion Hampton, he'll be gone. Copenhaver will be gone. J.J. Jones will be gone. Nesbitt will be gone. Defensively, the entire starting defensive line are all seniors. They'll all be gone. Power Eccles will be gone. Stick Lane will be gone. Harris will be gone at safety. Huzzy will be gone. Right. There's a lot of, Burnett will be gone. There's a lot of talent that will be leaving. So you have to make up for the talent that you've lost. Maybe you haven't developed the way that you should or wanted to. And then is the question of, okay, do you have enough money in the NIL coffers to bring in talent to replace those guys? So those are the questions that Bubba Cunningham will have to ask. Like, okay, can we afford, given the current landscape, to potentially have another season where it's kind of like this one, where you're 6-6 in a mediocre conference? That's the big question, and we can talk about our opinions on it. I'd like to know your take on that. But I think the admin level stuff, that's the question. Hopefully they're talking about right now.
Yeah, we're talking about Greg Barnes here on the next level. My opinion of it is last weekend was homecoming. I didn't hear anything about homecoming. I was at the game. The place was half full at best. And that was with Pittsburgh bringing a little bit of fans, not many. There were sections and swaths of the student section that were empty, and there were sections of the upper deck empty. I sit on the home side now, so I couldn't see that side, but granted it was in the shade, so it's probably a little more full. But that is the concern, Greg. You talk about the NIL coffers, is the apathy that continues to develop. We always talk, and it's funny, you use the quote, and I'm quoting your column, and if you're watching this or listening to this, you haven't read Greg's column about mediocrity, we can debate the word mediocrity. But your quote here, hope remains the most unsettling contagion during the offseason for all fan bases. And I always say, and I quote one of my singers that I love, it's not the hope, it's not the despair that gets you, it's the hope. Same thing. That is the concern if I'm an admin person. It's not necessarily the wins and losses, because you can have butts in the seats if you're losing. We've seen that around the country. I mean, Nebraska, you mentioned Nebraska. Nebraska is 400 straight sellouts, and they've sucked for a large portion of that. So my question back to you is it strictly a money and an apathy thing? Because people do not want to pour money. You don't want to chase bad money with good money, and people have their hard-earned money. We know the folks talk about the economy and whatever you want to talk about, but I'm not pouring money in to a losing proposition. That is insanity. And from what we've seen on the field repeatedly, without any, it doesn't matter who's coaching, at least assistant coaches and players, it appears. That is the biggest problem that I see here. And your thoughts on that, because we know money and football money drives the ship here, period.
Yeah, and I think we're in the early stages, not just the Carolina, but really across the country, of what type of fan reaction will there be when teams struggle despite fans rallying to the cause with NIL. NC State is a great example. Mm-hmm. NC State did a fantastic job at the end of last year and in the offseason to rally NIL money to be able to say, okay, well, look, we got some good pieces coming back. Let's do it. This is our shot. And I really think that's kind of the strategy, at least early on, for a lot of these mid-tier programs like an NC State or a Carolina, is when the pieces are kind of there, you rally your fan base and say, look, we only need like 5 guys, and then we can really compete finally for conference title. It may just be like a 1-year deal, but this is our chance. Actually, that's a good strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And State went all in with that, and what's happened? They're right there beside Carolina at the very bottom of the ACC standings. So State will be somebody to watch as well. But in this situation of, the Rams Club, for example, they do a fantastic job of raising money for facilities and scholarships. They've done it forever. And the thing about that is when you're building new facilities or you're renovating and upgrading, that's always forward thinking. It's not just about next year's team. This is about making the program better 5, 10, 20 years down the road. Scholarship money, it's not just about next year's programs. We want to make it so this is an endowment where for your years and years ahead, we've got the money there to support these programs with scholarship money. That's important stuff, and it's really not that dependent upon what's happening right now or next year or even 2 years from now. NIL, however, changes that dramatically. NIL is about the here and the now. Yes, there are 2-year contracts that they're using now, but I would imagine a large majority are still 1-year deals. And so you either have a situation like NC State where you've pumped money into NIL and you're not getting a good return on your investment, or as Carolina may face this offseason if things don't turn around very quickly on the football field, there may not be any NIL money to give out to players. And if you're not recruiting well at the high school level, which Carolina is struggling right now, like where do the players come from? And then you get into that vicious cycle. The whole thing with Larry Fedora, we were told, is while Bubba was not intent on letting go in 2018 with Fedora, what really forced his hand, in addition to Mack being available, was that recruiting just went off a cliff. And once you kind of go off a cliff recruiting-wise, it's hard to come back. And so that's the question of, if you're not able to raise NIL money to field a successful team, what's the next step? And that, as you said, Tommy, it's hope. If the fan base doesn't have hope that success is just around the corner and that more of the same is coming, you're really in dire straits.
Yeah, you mentioned NC State, and you're right. They pushed all their chips in.
Yeah.
And that fan base is realizing they're not a whole lot different in Carolina in that regard, because Carolina has had opportunities to take that leap and hadn't gotten it done. NC State, Florida State, that same position. They pushed all the chips in. It didn't work out, got screwed over, and now look at them standing at 1-5 or whatever their record is.
And Florida State's a great example because they did the same thing last year and it worked.
Yeah.
And they tried the exact same thing this year and it has failed miserably.
Yeah. So it's all about the money. Greg, a couple questions that I had, and I've seen them on the message boards. And when we do these shows, we try to answer fan message boards. And again, read Greg's column. But a lot of people have concerned. There's a decent thread on the boards that says it's a bad time to be irrelevant in college sports and college football. Is that a worry here for North Carolina as far as whether they're in the ACC or one of the Power 2 conferences? Does it matter that much day to day, season to season for that goal?
Yeah, I don't think so much day to day. I will say that obviously the better you are in football, the more it's going to help in conversations. And I think it was fascinating. Trying to remember exactly where it was that I read it, but Oklahoma, there had been a story out about when they sat down to talk with the SEC about joining several years ago. One of the questions from the SEC was, okay, well, like we expect these types of things in terms of facilities and money drives, fundraising, all these things, just to make sure you're checking the necessary boxes so that when you get to the SEC, the transition is going to be smooth. There's indication that you're really invested, all those things. Oklahoma, of course, that's not going to be an issue. But I would imagine the exact same questions would take place if the SEC were to expand and they come knocking, for North Carolina. And so while Carolina has done some things, as we've talked about in the past, to improve the facilities and expand the coaching staff and support staff and those types of things, which is all very important. How much are you able to show that, hey, we're really invested, we're all in? And obviously, if you're a good team and you're competing for ACC championships, at least to get into the game, that's an easier sell than if you're 5-7 and really struggling against somewhat of a soft schedule. So those are important questions, but I don't think it matters on a day-to-day basis. I think Carolina has a very well-rounded package, and I think the fact that football has probably struggled more than any other sport is a good thing from the standpoint that the rest of the program has a high expectation of excellence. Now it's just a matter of getting football there.
Yeah, so my question, and I didn't tell you I was going to ask this one because I wanted your unvarnished, unthought about opinion on this, is we talked a lot about admin support. We've heard it from people around the program a lot that the stomach is not there for admin support or for big time college football. How do you feel about that when it comes to North Carolina? Do you feel that's a valid or invalid statement, or is it more nuanced than that?
I think it's more nuanced than that. Now, I guess the question that I have is, what do you mean by that? And a lot of people have different opinions. All in. I was in a conversation on the, I guess it was the basketball board earlier this week, and somebody had made the comment, "Oh, Ohio State, they're cutting, I think, men's wrestling, maybe
Gymnastics or something. I saw.
yeah, but they're only interested in football. That's the only sport they care about." Well, they were 15th in the Directors Cup this past year. Carolina was 7th. So, does that mean they're not all in because they're dedicating money to other sports? That's the kind of question that I have in terms of the nuance of it. What I will say is that if you'd asked me that question 20 years ago, then probably the answer would be no. Mm-hmm. But Bubba Cunningham understands big-time football. People seem to forget that he spent a long time at Notre Dame. He went to school there. I think he played on the golf team there, and then was in the athletic department for 15 years or whatever it was. So he understands kind of that part of it. Now, he also values greatly North Carolina's having 28 Olympic sports. And so there are some, both in men's basketball and in football, who are saying, you know what? The sports that make all the money, they should get all the money. And the other sports should just fight for scraps and be happy with what they get. And I think that's really where you get into this conversation. And then, of course, the next part of that, Tommy, is it just a money issue? Mm-hmm. Can you buy culture?
And where does culture come from?
Yeah. And that's a very nuanced conversation. A lot of that is history. A lot of that's built up over time. I mean, South Carolina just all of a sudden say, you know what? Let's pack the stadium. Let's do it just for the heck of it. That was built up over years and years and years and years. And that's what it takes. I mean, it's a generational thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, why have you gone to football games for so long?
Been doing it forever. Don't know what else to do on a Saturday.
That's what your family did. That's what you did growing up. And I've got good friends who go to the ball games, every home game, and they go, with family who have been going for years and years. And so it really is a generational thing that builds up over time. And so all these are very valid questions. I do think that's a lot of talking to just try to answer the question. I do think there is support there for North Carolina to be successful with football. We can argue over whether or not there's enough money going to football. And I think at this point in time, really all North Carolina can do for that next step is make sure you have the best coaches possible at all positions and that your support staff is exactly what you need to compete at the highest levels, and then NIL funding. And that's really where you have to judge of, okay, is North Carolina ready to be there? And with the NIL money, and that goes back to your culture, because there are some fans at other schools who, I mean, they'll give every dime they've got to try to make sure that their team's going to be competitive the next year. I don't think there are that many Carolina fans in that boat. And I think that's part of the conversation as well.
Yeah, I think the biggest concern for me, the biggest concern you see from some fans on the boards, it is not a money issue. What we're seeing as far as Carolina's issues are not money related. Could they be money related as far as what coaches you hire? Then sure. But it's not, not having a punt, not preventing punts from being blocked is not a money issue. Things like that. And not developing, players is not a money issue. It's all tied together though, right?
It is, but I think you've talked about this before, and you mentioned it earlier, which I think is very astute, and I think it's kind of where we're at. Is the situation you want to be able to sell NIL the way that you should be able to sell it, is that you are efficient and you are effective in every single thing that you do. You beat all the teams that you should be beating, and you're solid in all three phases. That doesn't mean that you're elite, but that means you're not beating yourself, that other teams have to beat you. And once you get to that point, in the ACC, you're going to be able to win games. And you're going to be able to win a lot of games, 8, 9 games a year. But at that point, you can say, all right, guys, like we've got them coached up. We're developing players. We're getting diamonds in the rough and coaching them up. Like we feel good about where we're at. But if you want us to take that next step, we need to get a little bit better quality of player in here. That's all we're lacking. But we're not there right now. That's the thing. We're 6 years into the Mack Brown 2.0 era. And, as you said, they're losing to JMU. They could have had anybody on JMU's roster that they wanted. They lose to Duke. They could have most anybody they wanted off Duke's roster. Pittsburgh was a disaster last year. But they were able to kind of turn things around. And I still don't think they're a great team, but they're 5-0 and they're taking advantage of the games that are in front of them, which is all you can really do. And I think that's part of the issue here is, and we talked about this offseason, Tommy, coming into the year, this was the year that this coaching staff could say, you know what, we don't have Sam Howell, we don't have Drake May, but we're a better team. We finally have the depth. We have the rotations that we need. We have a really good coaching staff. We're going to fight and grind and take advantage of the schedule and get to 8, 9, maybe even 10 wins if things fall our way. And what we're seeing is, okay, well, now we know what happens when they don't have Drake May at quarterback. This is kind of more of the same. And they're going to have to scramble to get to a bowl game this year. And in year 6, that's kind of not where you want to be. You want to see there to be potential for an approved team next year. And sitting right now, 6 games in, I'm having a hard time seeing how this team could be better next year than it is right now.
It sort of feels like 17.
Sure.
And the way 17 was playing out, to your point, and we saw what happened when another year went by. Last question for you, Greg, and this is another one of those your opinions, but what moves the needle? I think James Madison is an inflection point. It's kind of like ECU 70 points and Bunning getting train whistled out of Utah and Louisville and all those type games. But what actually moves the needle in college football as far as changing coaches and all that stuff? And it doesn't necessarily have to be this team here, but just in general, what you've seen around the sport and around college athletics, what moves the needle for admin to say enough is enough?
I think inflection point's a good word there, Tommy, for JMU. And I think when things start to go bad, they spiral. We saw it with Fedora, and really the inflection point for Larry Fedora was the Duke game in 2016 when they had the lead and went east-west instead of north-south a couple times, and then the game got away from them and they lost, and it really fell apart from there on. I think at this point in time, the trajectory is not going in the right direction, but it still is still alive. It's still doing okay, trucking along. But it's not going to take much for this to really get going south quickly. And that's, as Max said the other day, it's not likely, but given the schedule, maybe they play a little bit better against Pitt. Maybe you can somehow get to 9-3. And there will still be some conversations about, okay, like, that's fine. They closed strong. But the first half of the season left sour taste in their mouth. But I think most everybody knows there's more losses coming. It's just going to be how many. And I think at some point, depending on how the games are played, this thing is already going a little bit in the southern direction. It could really pick up speed. Once it picks up speed, I don't think there's any way you come back from it. And so that's the challenging part right now. And it just so happens that, possibly the best team left in the schedule is coming to town Saturday.
Yep, Carolina will play Georgia Tech on the CW. If you're not in Kenan Stadium, if you're not inclined to go, you can watch it on the CW, along with the Gilmore Girls and all those type shows that come on the CW.
Vampire Slayer,
yeah. It is no laughing matter, though, that North Carolina's football program is in a spot where something has to change. I'm not qualified to make the changes or to call for the changes, but you can check us out on the game plan where Greg Barnes and Jason Staples on Thursday night will be talking about what needs to happen for Carolina to have hope. It's the hope that gets you against Georgia Tech on that Saturday. Greg, as always, before I go, I got to talk about our sponsors, Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. JohnnyT-Shirt.com, support them. Look, it doesn't matter about how Carolina does in athletics. You need to support Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com. Great folks, 10% off if you're a premium subscriber. And also Congruity. Email matt@congruityhr.com. Get your free assessment for your small to mid-sized business. It's the hope that gets you, Greg Barnes. And I don't hear a whole lot of hope, but we'll see. There's always a day. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tommy.